Alright, so the DJI Air 2S is the latest drone to come out from DJI, and Jason and I had a chance to actually fly it around, and honestly, I really like it. How's it going? My name is Andrew Murphy from Down Under in Gold Coast, Australia. So if you've been following me for a while, you know that I'm a Mavic 2 Pro kind of guy, but the Air 2S has a ton of super cool features, which has tempted me quite a bit to make the switch. And also a massive thanks to Jason as well for organizing this so quickly for us to actually test out and review. Now my first thoughts of this drone were like, heck yes, baby Mavic 2 Pro, and while it almost is, it is missing a couple of things. So the Air 2S now has that new 1-inch sensor on it, which was the big draw card for the Mavic 2 Pro when it first came out. And that allows us to shoot this 5.4K up to 30 frames per second and 4K up to 60 frames per second as well. And already, this is better than the Mavic 2 Pro's 4K 30 limitations. However, on the Air 2S, when you go above 30 frames per second in any mode, it crops in. Now, a 1-inch sensor is literally 4 times bigger than the sensor that's on the actual Mavic Air 2, which I believe is a 1/2-inch sensor. So this gives way better low light performance and a super clean image. Plus, you do get 10-bit video as well, which is so good because if you've ever shot 8-bit and then shot 10-bit, going back to 8-bit is super hard because you just lose all that color separation, especially when you're shooting near forests or grass and whatnot. In 8-bit, it's just so much worse. Now, while we're on image quality, I was actually really impressed by the dynamic range that this thing has. We took it up to the top of a mountain for sunrise, which is probably the most contrasty type of lighting that you could ever do, and it handled it super well. When I was actually flying it, it looked like shadows were really crushed, but then when I brought it onto the computer, there was actually a ton of dynamic range. And with a bit of highlight recovery as well in DaVinci Resolve, I was able to actually pull back those highlights super clean as well and get the image that looks like this. And this is all shot as well in D-Log in 10-bit color. Now the field of view on the Air 2S is now a little bit wider, so it's roughly a 22mm full frame equivalent, which is a good and a bad thing. So the good part is obviously that you're gonna get more in frame, and to get the same sort of shots, you're not gonna have to fly as far away. So if you're getting a shot of a mountain or a car or whatever, you can be a lot closer, so it's a lot safer, I guess. But the downside is that because it is wider, if you're trying to fly somewhere to actually shoot something, you have to fly a longer distance to get there. But on the Air 2S, you actually get this zoom function up to 8 times in a full HD mode. But the only bad thing is that this only works in the standard color mode, not in D-Log or the HLG flat profile. The Air 2S comes with DJI's new controller design that we saw on the Mini 2 and the Air 2 as well, and I actually really like the feel of it. It's not much heavier than the original controller that they used to have, and I think the stick feel is much nicer as well. I'm not sure if they're using different gimbals now on their controllers, but it feels really nice. Plus, having that screen on top of the controller is so much better. And also on the weight, the Air 2S is actually 312 grams lighter than the Mavic 2 Pro, which is actually a third of the weight of the Mavic 2 Pro itself. So if you are gonna be hiking mountains where every gram really does count, then this is probably a better option than the Mavic 2 Pro. And honestly, one of the most compelling reasons for me to swap from the Mavic 2 Pro is that it's a lot lighter. The transmission quality has been improved on the Air 2S as well for both the range and the video. So it's now using OcuSync 3.0, and you get 2 extra antennas in the actual drone itself. And this gives you up to 12 kilometers of range line of sight. And you're also getting a 1080p video feed to your phone as well. And it transmits up to 16 megabits per second. And honestly, coming from the Mavic 2 Pro, which only actually does 720p, I think, to your phone, it's such a big upgrade. You can actually notice it. It's just so much more detail. It's so much sharper. So much better for flying. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these shots I've been showing you have only been in 4K, not the full 5.4K. And this was an accident that I didn't even realize till afterwards. But when you actually activate tracking mode by clicking and dragging on the screen, it tells you to change to 4K because that's the highest resolution it actually works in. And because we were trying to test out everything, I just forgot that we actually set it to 4K when we're testing out those tracking modes. But the Activetrack on the Air 2S is insanely good. So it's now up to Activetrack 4.0, and the improvements they've made from version 2 on the Mavic 2 Pro, freaking huge. And the best part now is that to actually activate it, all you have to do is just click and drag on the screen. You don't have to dive into the menus and figure it out. And this actually opens up the Spotlight, Activetrack, and Point of Interest menu, which then you can choose which one you want to do from here. So this clip right here was shot using Spotlight 2.0, and to get this shot manually on a drone requires a freaking ton of skill and concentration. And because I was using this Spotlight tracking feature, I literally used one finger to get this whole shot, and it's probably better than what it would have been if I tried to do it manually as well. Now what is super cool is that if it actually loses sight of view, it'll drop a pin to use as a reference, and then it'll just continue doing the movement seamlessly. And like the pin, I don't know exactly how it works, if it's GPS or it's just like a vision thing, but it's pretty accurate. I don't understand. Now for this shot, we use that Activetrack 4.0, and again, it's crazy how well it's able to just like track me and fly smoothly and keep me in the center of frame as well. Plus again, you can see how good the low light performance is, because this was actually shot at blue hour after the sun had set. For this shot, we tried to use that point of interest 3.0, and again, it did a really good job until it almost clipped the long grass, and you can see it just like the sensors kick in and stop it from actually like crashing, but it actually never stopped tracking me even after it kind of like stopped the drone itself. Now one thing I noticed immediately when flying the Air 2S was how quick it was even in just the normal mode. So it was probably a little bit too twitchy for my liking, but like it's something that you would get used to over time. And even when Jason was flying, I like kept asking him, I was like, are you in sports mode or normal mode? And he literally was a bit like, yeah, it's just in normal mode. It's just super quick, hey? And I'd say because the sensors are like way more sensitive now compared to say the Mavic 2 Pro, it will allow you to fly faster while still having those sensors activated, which is pretty cool. And also the ascent rate is, I think it's nearly double the speed of the Mavic 2 Pro, so be really careful when you actually bring it down, because it freaking hooks it, hey? Now one thing that really grabbed my attention from the launch video was the addition of this new Mastershots feature. So basically with Mastershots, you just choose a subject or point of interest and then press go, and it just cycles through a bunch of different shots and automatically keeps you in the frame. And this is perfect for people who are just learning out how to fly and don't really know exactly like what kind of shots to get. And it will create shots actually designed by professional drone pilots, and it'll do it automatically for you. The only downside that I noticed is that it defaults back to 1080p auto settings and the standard picture profile, but for most people, I think this is gonna be fine. Now the biggest difference between the Air 2S and the Mavic 2 Pro is that lack of aperture in the camera, which allows you to get that like precision control over your exposure. And to be honest, as much as I love the Air 2S, it's something that I did miss. However, DJI also have included a actual ND filter set in the Fly More kit for the Air 2S, and it comes with a ND4, ND8, ND16, and 32, which is perfect for basically nearly every lighting condition. But even with these on, you'll find yourself still adjusting your shutter speed to get that perfect exposure, because if you adjust the ISO, it just doubles each time, which sometimes is too much. One thing I did notice but when in auto mode is the ISO adjusts in 1/10 the stop increments, so realistically, if DJI could add this control into the manual in like a firmware update, that would be so good, and that would save the hassle of not having the aperture control. And also when you're in manual mode as well, you do have the option to use an auto ISO or an auto shutter speed, so if you want like semi-manual controls, you can do that, so that's gonna be handy as well. And the other big difference is the lack of sideways sensors on the Air 2S compared to that Mavic 2 Pro. And although like now you've got those upwards facing sensors, and the sensors in general on the Air 2S are much more sensitive than the ones in the actual Mavic 2 Pro, you do have to keep this in mind if you are going to be flying sideways, because you're not going to have that obstacle avoidance. Now, if you are tossing up between the Mavic 2 Pro and the Air 2S, in my opinion, I think the Air 2S is a better option. I'm probably potentially going to sell my Mavic 2 Pro and get the Air 2S, mainly just because it's a lighter drone. You get those newer features like the autonomous features, and you don't really lose any image quality as well. But if you did enjoy this review, then consider liking and subscribing. And if you want to find out more about the Air 2S or where to buy it, I'll leave some links down below. And as always, guys, stay creative and just be you. Have fun.